This is Jane Low, and I'm at the Downtown Centre here in Singapore. And with me today, I am very pleased and very privileged to have Michael and Kumar, who are two cybersecurity experts. And we'll be talking about some of these behind-the-scenes ransomware operations and key actions that organizations should be aware of that we may not have considered. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much, Jane. Really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Yeah, pleasure to be here too.
Yeah, so I thought the three themes that we can potentially cover when it comes to ransomware, the non-technical aspects of considerations. Number one is obviously the digital investigations and forensics, some of the people aspects that we need to take into account. The second thing is about the negotiation process, how that works. And then I think the last thing that most people are kind of wondering about is also whether to pay ransom or not, so to pay or not to pay, right? So these are kind of the three themes I thought we can cover today, but obviously there are a lot of other aspects when it comes to ransomware, but perhaps for another podcast. So Michael, so you have a lot of experience in digital forensics and investigations. So when organizations is hit with a ransomware note, what is the first thing that they should be considering?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, first thing the organizations should do when they are hit with a ransomware is don't panic, right? So it may not be as bad as you think, but of course you wouldn't know during that time. I think there's a lot of anxiety going on. So the first thing we always sort of recommend is to verify the breach, So although your IT sort of guys or IT department may tell you that, look, all our data is being held ransom, we can't access to it, So this is, terrible, But you have to verify the breach because sometimes some of this ransomware, it may not be legit, It could just be some data that they have extracted from the dark web, And then it may not be infiltrating to all your databases, or you may have backups that you can recover within 24 hours. Okay. So always verify the breach to see the extent of the data that's held ransom, to know where your data is, to know whether your BCP, what BCP is a business continuity plan. So most organizations, large and even SME nowadays always have a BCP because data is the lifeline of any company, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't leave all your eggs in one basket. So you always have a backup somewhere else. But it's just a matter of how do you access your backup data and how long it takes. So the key here is timing, because if for some larger organization, maybe the timing is they need 72 hours to recover all the backup data, right? So that is where we will use the 72 hours to perhaps negotiate with the attackers, sort of what you call to buy some time, right? To be able to recover the data. But of course, a lot of these are all academic. Because if you have not tried to recover your data, maybe it's not 72 hours. After 72 hours later, the IT support will say we only have 10% of the data, right? And then that's not good enough for the operation or the organization to function.
So obviously, we need to rehearse beforehand, pretend there's a ransomware scenario and see how we react, right?
Yes. Then you have a better visibility. But for organizations that have not done that, then sometimes it's a bit tricky because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right, and obviously when it comes to data, there are all sorts of different types of data. There's personal data, corporate data, and then when it comes to breach notification to the relevant authorities, there's a separation between what kinds of data and how severe is the impact, isn't it?
I agree. Not all data are equal, right? So there are some data like really confidential data, client information or PI, personal information identifier. So if you are certain that those data is being held ransom, and again, the definition of data ransom here, if someone have access to your data and hold it ransom, you can also assume they have access to your data that they can take it out as well, right? So that means there is also a high potential of data leakage.
Yeah, I mean, I was probably going to talk about this along the way, but you're right, that distinction between what is personal data and what's not has implications on your obligations under the relevant statutes to notify, and also what might happen in the sense that whether or not you're in breach of your obligations to keep that data secure, right? So there are implications about that as well. But I'm sure we'll come to that when we talk about the legal implications.
Yeah, I think one of the kind of knee-jerk reaction is, do we have to call the regulators once we found out that there's a signs of being breached, right? And then there's a lot of, I guess, legal sort of considerations that comes into play. What is considered necessary for notification, and then who else, what kind of stakeholders you need to notify, shareholders, not just the regulators, right, and also the end users. So I think there's another aspect when it comes to data being compromised, right, and then whether next we activate the backups to keep the organization running. And then during that phase, I think there's some tension between how fast do we need to recover versus what kind of evidence do we need to preserve for regulatory reasons as well, and for legal reasons. I think most of it, in case you get a lawsuit coming from, one of your clients whose data has been taken out. So what is the kind of interesting stories that you've seen there in this kind of balance between, to preserve evidence versus to recover operations immediately?
That's a very good point. So I think it has to happen concurrently, because in terms of the operational readiness to recover the data is critical for a business, right? So that has to happen concurrently. So there's always two teams that we recommend. So there's always your tech team or data recovery team, right? So their focus is to recover data, because the faster that you can recover your data, then they have less leverage, because if you're talking about ransom on data, right? But in the meantime, you have to have another forensic team, right, to preserve all the evidence, because preserving the evidence, or actually more than preserving evidence, you need to find out what has happened, So how the breach happened as well, right? Because you want to prevent the next incident. If not, it will keep coming back at you.
You want to learn, take some learning.
Not solving the problem, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so the forensic team will then understand, what has happened, and then preserve the evidence. And this can be very useful for a few aspects. Number one, for insurance, right? Moving forward, there may be insurance company that's involved, ransomware insurance. Then by preserving all the sort of crime scene, right, then you're able to more effectively claim your insurance. Right. And then, of course, the next step is to prevent it from happening again. So the preservation and the forensic aspect is also important and has to happen concurrently. So I can't say one is more important than the other, because when it comes to forensic, it's volatile information. So the longer you wait to preserve, the data or the information will be gone, right?
Yeah, and then, sorry.
I wanted to just add, the difficulties that I've faced actually revolve around emails, funnily enough. So some organizations don't realize that there's a log retention policy, whether you're using Outlook or Gmail. And I believe for Gmail, it's a 60-day retention policy. And for Outlook, it might differ, maybe like 2 weeks or 30 days, depends on how it's set up. And by the time you actually realize that your logs are being overwritten, it might be too late. So businesses really need to take steps to ensure that they've got a longer retention policy, and that when an incident happens, you actually take steps to preserve that. Because one of the areas in which the systems could be compromised is through emails, quite common, right? Yeah, so email preservation is very important, actually.
Wow, okay. And I think the other question that people normally have is there's also this tension, like when it comes to information sharing, like what have you found out, right? So you have the investigation team, you have the forensics team, you have the regular, IT team that's doing the backups, and then from a legal point of view, I understand there's certain boundaries that you kind of have to respect in terms of sharing that kind of information.
There is. I mean, what immediately comes to mind is how cheeky some of these businesses have been when reporting. So because it's a PR risk as well, right? And you've got to manage telling the public stakeholders and relevant authorities what's happened. And I know that for some businesses, they've been very careful in publishing information on what's been compromised and what's been not. And I think the emphasis that they put there, one of the strategies is to emphasize what hasn't been compromised. Actually, it's really quite common it's a trend really. If you look at all the notices that have been published by business compromised, it's an attempt to both say we're taking steps to remedy, secure, but in any case, there's a portion that isn't compromised as well. That tends to be the trend that I've at least observed.
Well, I'm sure that we can talk a lot more about the investigation and forensics phase, but we want to come to the negotiations. I think that's a behind-the-scenes kind of activity that goes on that is not so much reported, right? And Michael, you have a lot of experience in this. So negotiations, I think, when do organizations have to enter into negotiations, or do they can they just ignore the ransomware notes?
Again, I think, like I said, negotiation is actually a good strategy, regardless at the end of the day whether you pay or not to pay, which we'll get to that, because negotiation, like you say, first of all, it buys us some time, right? And it's actually a golden opportunity as well. When you think of a data breach or hacking incident, right? So typically, most of the hacking incident, the perpetrator or the hacker will be silent, anonymous, right? So it'll be behind the scene. So you will have no interaction with the hacker. But when it comes to ransomware, it's a golden opportunity because you have a chance to interact with the hacker. And you have to, right? Because in order for them to get money from you, they have to negotiate, right? They have to reply to you. They have to tell you where to send the money.
So it's normally through emails, is it?
It could be through emails.
Not WhatsApp, I guess.
Well,
Could be on the dark web.
I think for obvious reason, I don't want to go into the details of how we do it.
Oh, right, okay.
So, but there are secure channels that we will communicate with the hackers.
So you recommend using secure channels, basically, right?
And also engaging cybersecurity experts to do so. So that's a very good point. So imagine if you are a company, let's say you are CEO of a company, right? And then you try to negotiate with the hacker using your mobile phone or your personal laptop. Guess what? You'll be compromised as well. So I don't recommend that.
Right.
Get the experts to do it, right? Because
Isolated, yeah.
Exactly. So they will have measures to protect their environment, right? They will know how to interact and how to communicate, without being attacked again, right?
So you recommend engaging cybersecurity experts, I guess, who will also advise you in terms of preparing for that negotiation session.
Yeah, not just that, I think the strategy here is really delay. You have to delay by time while talking to the hacker. It's unfortunate because while that conversation is taking place, it's only then that you can assess the extent of the damage and assess what to do next, right? So delaying in the course of negotiations, I would say, is an important part of it as well.
So once you receive the ransomware note, how long do you wait before you engage the criminals? To start a negotiation?
It depends. I think once the company decides to, let's say, engage the lawyers and cybersecurity experts, then we can start the negotiation process. But before we do that, we will do our research.
You need to do research,
exactly.
Right? So what do these research encompass?
First of all, we will try to research on who the attackers are, because there are certain patterns, there are certain call signs, there are certain things that, again, without going into too much details, not letting the cat out of the bag, so we are able to research on the attackers as well. And more importantly, the past behavior, because there are probably some syndicate that do release the data upon paying, and there's some who don't. Right. So at the end of the day, you might end up paying and paying again, right? And then your data will still be on the dark web. So another thing that we do, which is quite effective, is we will immediately go to the dark web, to see whether your data has already been sold, because they could be trying to get a ransom while they are also selling the data, because they are usually they will cash out in more than one ways, right?
Right, double extortion, is that what?
Yeah, double or even triple. That's a very good point. Usually reality is a triple extortion. So how that works is the first time they will ask you for ransom, a small amount, so to test whether you are willing to pay. So you pay the first ransom, then it will be the double extortion, right?
So they come back.
Come back, right, for the bigger amount. And usually after the big amount, you won't pay anymore, right? So then they will sell the data on the dark web. So that's the third round.
Right, okay. Have you seen any cases where they actually threaten like DDoS as well as part of this double extortion, triple extortion?
Well,
to escalate the threat level?
There are
certain situations.
Yeah, exactly. So good point. So that's why while you're buying time, you have to do a lot of things concurrently. So that's a very good point. I want to reiterate this, right? So while you are negotiating, 3 things you need to do. Get your data up, right? Recover the data that is being held ransom, right? Backup. So second thing is get forensic in to study what has gone wrong, right? And then the third thing is to actually start fixing the lapse, So obviously there are breaches, there are gaps, right? So you start patching it, because if you do not patch it, then like you said, then you have more attacks coming in, and then it probably become more severe.
So at this point, is it reasonable to expect that, you kind of have in the back of your mind how much or how little you are willing to give ground in terms of paying, or in terms of how many times you want to negotiate, or how long the negotiation session is,
There's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to negotiation, right? So it really depends on the sort of case. But of course, we need to work very closely with the client, because sometimes the data that they have that's held ransom is very critical. So let's say healthcare, it deals with life and death kind, right? Medical records.
Like WANNACRY incident.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. And then even, let's say, in the professional services, right? I think Kumar is very familiar with that. So sometimes you have certain data that's critical for the stock market, M&A, So these things can actually, affect transactions in millions of billions of dollars.
That's right. I mean, ultimately, your ability to provide services and even produce goods will be disrupted as a result of the ransomware attack, right? And that has obviously implications down the road.
What's the number one thing that people should keep in mind during this negotiation phase?
Well, keep calm. Keep calm. Yeah.
Well, I mean, having a plan in place obviously is a very fundamental thing, right? Because if not, you won't know what to do. And that's when you get exploited. Actually, in reality, not having a plan or strategy to deal with the issue is when you're more vulnerable. So it's important to be one step ahead. I mean, know that, touch wood, no attack will take place, but you need to be prepared, right? I think that's critical. That's key, actually, because prevention is always better than dealing with the issue.
Yeah, prevention is always better than cure, right? There's also cases where I guess the threat attackers we talk about doing due diligence on the threat attackers, but they also obviously have done a lot of investigation into the organization they want to attack, right? Whether they have backups, whether the backups are reliable, whether they can compromise the backup. So they have also done their homework, basically, right?
They would have targeted you for a reason, actually, to be honest. Either that, or they're just doing a phishing, sort of like you just do a spam, try and figure out who the targets are, and then decide who has the biggest wallets, basically.
There's also been some observations that it's no longer the big organizations that the threat actors are targeting. It's also the small, medium-sized organizations who have the weakest cybersecurity posture and who are, okay, paying $2,000, $3,000 ransom. So threat attackers could spam, a lot of these medium-sized organizations, and $2,000, $3,000, 10 times, 100 times is quite a good return.
Not just that. I think that's really the modus operandi not to get caught. Because if the loss is limited to a small amount, nobody's going to take steps to catch the person. Yes. And that's the biggest problem, actually, that I face, in the sense that if the loss is small, the cost-benefit analysis just doesn't support, both in terms of, I would say with respect, the authorities, and also on private actors. Like, why just suck it up, eat the loss, and move on? And that's what they want. That's the reason why they do a smaller targeted attack.
Right, yeah. I think it's a misconception that only big organizations need to be aware of ransomware, but it's in actual fact, a lot of small, medium-sized mom-and-pop stores, e-commerce stores may get targeted, and like you say, we'll just want to move on. Okay, you want $2,000, okay.
Take it,
right? Yeah. Okay, so now we come to the pay or not to pay. $2,000, okay.
I mean, I'm never going to suggest that we pay, but I want to talk about the legal implications first, because there are quite a few, right? And the distinction between personal data and non-personal data is important, because if you keep personal data, you've got obligations to make sure it's secure. And so the moment that there's an attack, technically you're already in breach of that obligation to keep data secure. And there will be, and there's also an obligation to notify the authorities in Singapore, it's the PDPC. And there will probably be investigations after that and an assessment made on what measures were put in place, how it occurred, what remedial measures should therefore be put in place to stop it from happening again, and then liability, right? There are fines as well, depending on the extent of the breach and how long it's taken place, right? So while the attack is happening, just bear in mind that there might be this process as well that might unfold over the next few months concerning personal data, right? So that's one part of the equation that businesses need to be aware of and be prepared to address. The second part is, in the event you decide to pay, right? you might be paying an entity that's a known criminal organization or a sanctioned entity, and that might draw liability for breach of sanctions regulations.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right, some entities or individuals might be on OFAC sanctions lists. We don't know. I mean, Michael might be able to identify them. You might not know at the time, but the risk is there. That's the point, right? Third, insurance. I mean, some businesses have got insurance. You really need to analyze the terms to see what your strategy should be in the event of such an attack. Do you have an obligation to notify? Is coverage void if you pay out? These are important questions that you need to know before you pull the trigger. Because if you can fall under the insurance policy, then you do everything you can to limit your loss and try to rely on your insurance policy. That's actually a very important avenue for recovery, actually, because in this situation, you've got a few options for recovery, right? You go after the hacker, you go after the intermediary, or you try to rely on insurance, right? So insurance is an important part of mitigating your loss. The fourth part, I know there are a few parts, I've got 5 in total. The fourth part, right, is actually your liability as a result of your inability to provide goods and services. As a result of the attack, you may be in breach of your contracts. You may not be able to perform your services, whether it's a professional service or it's a manufacturing line, etc. And then there's the next step in the analysis, right, is to look at the contractual relationship between the business and the person affected, and see whether or not the contract actually talks about the risk and how risk is supposed to be shared or allocated in the event of this type of attack. And most of the time it's silent. Most of the time the contract is silent. If you're lucky, someone has put in a force majeure, has put in the cyber attack as a force majeure, which means that the loss lies where it falls, that the contract sort of is discharged, and the loss sort of, it may end there depending on how the contract is phrased. If not, you need to start getting creative on how to deal with that that risk, the potential risk on inability to provide goods and services, right? So that's one risk that is certainly there in the event there's an attack and you can't provide what you're contractually obliged to provide. The final part, in my view, of the legal implications is something that people actually don't really talk about, I think, in ransomware attacks, which is going after the threat actors.
But you leave it to the law enforcement, no? Agencies?
Sometimes we do leave it, but you know that it depends on it really depends on the facts.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's really fact dependent, and whether or not you're fortunate enough that you can follow the money to a bank, to an exchange, centralized exchange. Following the money to a bank or centralized exchange gives you legs to identify the persons involved, because there's mandated KYC information that banks and exchanges need to collect. Yeah, so you can technically mount an action. It's Hornbook law that misappropriated assets are held on constructive trust. It means the thief holds on to your assets for you. The law recognizes that. You can also go after the hacker for breach of confidence because they've taken your confidential information. And duress also, because you've been forced to pay out. There's a duress argument there against the threat actor. So technically there is a recovery option as well.
Which is quite long in terms of timing. That's not going to be immediate, right?
Correct. It really depends, because if you move fast enough and you're lucky enough to get an order sort of freezing monies in a bank account, then at least you mitigate your loss. The issue here is mitigating loss. Yeah.
I think in the Colonial Pipeline case, I think the law enforcement actually recovers some of the money.
Yeah, it does take time, but the good thing is if it's being paid by crypto, like digital asset, then there is more avenue for you to recover or to freeze the money.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. But a lot of the points that you raised, right, they would be very, very relevant to sort of big organizations, right? Like, so if we go back to that question of, they're targeting small, medium-sized enterprises who probably don't have cyber insurance. So I guess for them, the immediate action is just, as we were saying, just to move on, pay and move on.
So I think Michael has sort of touched about what to do actually in this sort of situation, right? And first one is assess the extent of the compromise. To what extent has your information been compromised, and on which extent isn't compromised? Can you safeguard that? First step, right? Second step, as Michael said, can you recover the data? Is paying really the only option? You really need someone qualified to answer that question. Because if it's not the only option, then don't pay. It's sort of the analysis sort of ends there if you're able to fight back and preserve and retain information, right? But you need to be able to act quickly and get an answer to that while you delay. As I said, while you're delaying, You need to make these assessments on whether or not you can actually recover the data. And then, of course, there's the legal implications, right, and the reputational risk.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Right, and you need to make, ultimately, it's a cost-benefit analysis on
Yeah. So I just want to add, actually, when it comes to paying, right, in the hackers community, right, so they do see it as a vulnerability. So as long as you pay, whether you are SME or large corporation, then you will be attacked again, right? And may not be the same threat actor, but be other people in the community, because they will exchange notes, that sharing, so this is an easy target, right? So I think you have to be careful while you're SME. You don't want to make yourself an easy target, because you can't keep fending off attackers over and over
That's
again,
very
right?
good point. Yeah.
And just building on that, right? The threat actors will also identify as a class of businesses, right? Which ones can I attack? So you identify, for example, e-commerce businesses in this time here, I can attack them, or people hosted in a particular way. You're giving them information as well that they can use to carry out further activities.
Correct. So you don't want to do that. Sometimes by not paying, bite the bullet, suffer the loss, you're actually doing yourself a favor. They'll move on to other easy target, right? So I'm not easy target, right?
So the really important thing is to have backups, reliable backups, isn't it?
Yes.
So you have your leverage there, right?
Absolutely.
And you can just, say, okay.
You've got nothing to ransom, who cares, right?
Right, yeah. But I guess the other thought that people have in the back of their minds is that, okay, I have backup, I can recover my operations, but the attackers may have already, taken certain information and they may have posted on dark web. Then you need to sort of start activating your crisis communication, right, campaign and deal with that PR side of things, right?
Unfortunately, the compromise of personal data will result in there will most likely be consequences for that. But I mean, it can be mitigated, it can be managed, and it can be handled, and lessons can be learned to sort of prevent that from happening. So that journey can still take place. It's not throw the baby out entirely.
Paying can be part of the negotiation tactic strategy as well, because in any hostage negotiation, I mean, your data is being held hostage. I'm sure you watch a lot of movies about hostage situation. So sometimes what we do is you need to demand proof of life. Right?
Correct.
So the hacker or the threat actor was saying that I have all your data ransom and I have the decryption key. I have a key that can decrypt, release all your data, but how true is that? How genuine? So we will have to then ask them for a proof. So maybe to decrypt a small set of data, Of course, then in return, they say, then can you send us some crypto, right? So it has to be good faith when you do a negotiation. Yeah. So maybe a small token of consideration in return for the decryption key. Then we can ascertain that it really works, You can, once you pay the full amount, that's the idea.
That's a risk you take as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But while doing that process is very advantageous to us as well. Number one, you buy time. Second, then you know the wallet address. You know more information, So, and once you get, let's say, the crypto wallet address, then that can lead us to
I mean, if they're
pursue
complacent,
other avenues.
because a lot of people are complacent actually. Threat actors tend to be. Some of them are complacent. They hold assets on private wallets. Some of them just, like barefaced, just go straight to a centralized exchange. We're dealing with some cases similar to that now.
Yeah.
So that if they are complacent, they may get caught. So you may have some ability to get some of your assets back.
So asking for the proof of life can be a good strategy as well. And again, you may have to pay some token sum, but as part of the strategy, I think that could be an acceptable move as well.
But there's also in some cases where, you get the decryption key, but the threat actors would also have duplicated the data. You can't prevent that, right?
There's never any guarantee that
There's
you
no
pay. There's no guarantee whether if you pay, you'll get what you want, or they won't exploit it further, right? And that's the bottom line here. And because there's no guarantee, obviously, I don't think paying is obviously it's not a good option, right?
It's not. Yeah, having gone through this conversation, I realized that the trade-offs doesn't quite work out.
Yeah.
It's not a good option, but in some case, it's like when the organization went in, they have no backup. So it's impossible to recover the data. And like what Kumar said, if without the data, your business cannot operate, You cannot fulfill your contract, You'll probably be having a lot of, in months to come, you have to deal with all the lawsuit for non-completion of duties or contract. Then in that case, just the fact of releasing your data could give you a bit of, leeway in terms of solving one problem, not solving the other, So it really depends on the case by case, right? If that's the only data you have, then it makes the consideration a very different aspect.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all.
There
Obviously,
isn't.
right? Depends on the situation and the severity of the, the size of the organization, the severity, and whether you know who the threat actors are and their past actions and behaviors. But in some cases, all these threat actors, they may disband or regroup under a new name. You don't know as well, right? They might come back and, relaunch their ransomware attack. So if, I'm just kind of conscious of the time. So if there's one takeaway for our listeners is to have backup.
Yes.
And a strategy as well.
A strategy, practice, or crisis communication.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. Because faced with a crisis, you need to have a plan to deal with the crisis and what comes after that. So, having internal discussions or policies, just as a starting point so that, you are aware that it's a potential issue and there are steps in place to deal with it, that'll be helpful.
Yeah, prepare for it, right? Yeah.
So a main key takeaway from me is a ransomware is not just a technical issue, right? It's a business crisis. So as what Kumar mentioned, you need to have a strategy in place. You need to manage it like a crisis. So you need to get the right people, the legal team, the PR team, of course the technical team, but all this have to be managed as a crisis, and keep calm, don't panic.
Yeah, keep calm, don't panic.
And there are always certain things that, it's not as bad as it looks, but you just have to go through the motion to see what it means to the organization. There's no one size fit all in that sense.
Just do a lot of practice beforehand, isn't
right,
it?
yeah.
Right, tabletop exercises
that
and
would
all
be very helpful.
Right, yeah. So I am conscious that we can always talk about this for a length of time and delve into a case study or more than one case study. But very grateful for sharing some of your insights into some of these behind the scenes negotiation, digital investigations, forensics, and to pay not to pay considerations, and what people should take away. Number one, backups, and have a strategy, practice them. So very grateful for your time today, Kumar and Michael.
Thank you, Jean. Real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Jean. Yeah, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic, fascinating. I hope we don't have to do another update to this.
That's true.
That's true.
Thank you.
That's true.
Thank you. Thanks.